I never realized how much silence could hurt until it became the only thing we shared. Every morning, it was the same. I'd make coffee, the comforting, almost mechanical routine, while Molly would sit on the windowsill, staring out the window. Her back was always turned to me, her gaze lost in something outside. Maybe the trees in the yard, maybe the street, maybe something I could never see. The mornings had become ritualistic, calm, but undeniably empty. We didn't talk much anymore. It wasn't a fight. It wasn't even anger. It was just quiet. And after months of this silence, I realized that, for better or worse, we had both grown used to it. Neither of us asked about the lack of conversation, about the absence of laughter, or the disconnection that seemed to grow between us with every passing day. It was easier that way, wasn't it? It's always easier to pretend that everything is fine, to let the silence fill in the spaces that used to be filled with words. But then, on that morning, something changed. Molly's phone buzzed on the kitchen counter, breaking the quiet rhythm between us. She glanced at it out of the corner of her eye, a slight smile tugging at the corner of her lips. The smile wasn't directed at me. I noticed that immediately. She wasn't looking at me, not even acknowledging my presence, but I saw it. A fleeting flash of joy, of something real. It felt strange, watching it from the other side of the room. My hand stilled on the coffee pot as I glanced over at the screen of her phone. I couldn't help but notice the name Ashley. It wasn't unfamiliar. Ashley was an old friend of Molly's from college, someone who'd recently moved back to town. I'd heard about her before, in passing, through a few casual conversations. I had nothing against Ashley, but something in the way Molly's smile deepened made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. It wasn't the smile of a woman who had just gotten a text from a friend. It was the smile of someone who had just been reminded of someone that had made her feel alive in a way I hadn't in months. I tried to focus on the coffee, on the small mundane task of stirring the grounds, but my thoughts kept drifting back to that smile. It wasn't like anything I had seen from Molly in a long time. It was sincere. It was happy. And it wasn't for me. I tried to shake it off. Maybe I was overthinking it. She was just talking to an old friend. That's all. But even as I told myself that, I couldn't stop the growing knot in my stomach. I'd learned to ignore the little things, the way she'd become distant, the way she'd take longer and longer to come back from errands, the way she started wearing new perfume that smelled too sweet, too different, the way she'd be glued to her phone whenever I wasn't around. But now, this smile felt like a sign, like something I couldn't ignore anymore. The silence in the room felt heavier. I wanted to ask her about it. I wanted to speak, to break the quiet, but something held me back. It wasn't anger. It wasn't even fear. It was just an overwhelming feeling that maybe, just maybe, I didn't want to know the truth. Not yet. So, I stayed silent. We both stayed silent. But that silence? It was slowly becoming unbearable. Days went by, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted. At first, it was small things that I noticed, the way Molly started coming home later than usual, or how she would spend more time on the phone, her conversations becoming more private, her eyes darting away from mine when I walked into the room. The perfume, the sweet, unfamiliar scent that seemed to cling to her more and more. It wasn't like she was hiding anything obvious. There were no overt signs that something was wrong, but something in her behavior had changed, and I couldn't ignore it. I had gotten used to the small details, the way she had become distant in the past few months, but now I was seeing patterns. She'd often say she was going to the coffee shop, but when I asked her about it, she'd hesitate just a little too long before answering. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe I was reading too much into things, but I could feel the gap widening between us, and it wasn't just the silence anymore. It was like she was slowly slipping away, like the connection we'd once had was dissolving, bit by bit, and I was helpless to stop it. One evening, after I'd finished grading papers and she'd been out for a while, I went into the living room to check the laptop, something I hadn't done in months. I wasn't looking for anything specific, but I couldn't shake the sense that something was off. The laptop was open, the screen lit up with a chat window on the screen. Molly's chat. Her conversation with Ashley. I didn't mean to read it. I didn't want to. But something made me scroll, just a little, and as I did, I saw the messages. Heart emojis, shared jokes from their college days, moments of laughter that seemed too personal for someone like me to witness. I'd never seen these jokes before, never heard her speak of these moments with me. It was clear that this was something they had built together, something that I wasn't part of, and something that had never been shared with me. The longer I looked at the messages, the more I could feel my heart sink, not from betrayal, but from something else, something deeper. There was a distance between Molly and me, a space that I couldn't seem to cross. The realization hit me hard. I wasn't part of her world in the way I once had been. And what hurt the most was how easily it seemed to come for her. But what struck me the most wasn't the chat itself, it was the photo. A black and white image that seemed to capture something so intimate, so private. It was of Molly and Ashley embracing. It wasn't just any hug. It was Molly's arms around Ashley, but there was something about the way it was framed, how Molly was holding Ashley from behind. I couldn't remember the last time Molly had held me like that. The photo wasn't just of two friends, it felt like something more. The way they were wrapped up in each other, the closeness that radiated from it, was a closeness I hadn't seen between Molly and me in so long. I felt an ache in my chest, something unfamiliar, like an old wound being reopened. This wasn't just about an affair. This was different. This wasn't about the physical. It was about the emotional distance that had crept between us, the kind of distance that made it easier to fall into someone else's arms, even if it was just a hug. I closed the laptop quickly, almost violently, as if the act of looking had somehow made it all real. But it was too late. I couldn't unsee it. I couldn't erase the image from my mind. I wanted to confront her, to ask her directly about Ashley, about the photo, about everything. But I couldn't. Something stopped me, a voice in my head telling me to wait, to let it play out. But that voice, too, was quiet, and the silence between us only grew louder. That night, I lay in bed next to Molly, our bodies inches apart, and I stared at the ceiling, wondering when we had gotten here. When had we stopped being the people who shared everything with each other? When had we become strangers? I wanted to reach out, to break the silence between us, but I didn't. I couldn't. The silence was comfortable in its own way, even though it was suffocating. And I wondered, was it too late to fix it? Or had we both already given up, without ever saying the words? It wasn't the smile. It wasn't the perfume, or the late nights, or the text with heart emojis. It wasn't any one thing that finally broke me, it was the weight of it all. The cumulative pressure of the small changes that had been piling up over the last few months, each one a little more significant than the last, until they finally became impossible to ignore. I could feel the shift in Molly, the way she seemed to slip further away from me with every passing day. I had been patient, trying to give her space, trying to pretend that everything would work itself out. But as the weeks went on, I realized I couldn't pretend anymore. I had to know the truth, even if it was something I wasn't ready to hear. I couldn't keep living in this limbo, unsure of what was going on in her mind, of what was happening between her and Ashley. So, one night, as we sat in the living room, the silence stretched between us like a thick blanket, I finally asked the question that had been sitting on the tip of my tongue for so long. Are you in love with her? The words left my mouth before I could stop them, blunt and raw, and I immediately regretted it. I had imagined this moment 100 times, playing it out in my head in different ways, but I had never expected it to come out like that, as if the dam had burst without warning. Molly froze. For a long time, she didn't say anything. She didn't cry. She didn't get defensive. She just sat there, her eyes focused on the floor, her fingers twisting the fabric of her shirt. I waited for her to deny it, to assure me that it wasn't like I thought, that she was just going through a phase, or that I was imagining things. But when she finally lifted her gaze to meet mine, there was no denying it. She nodded slowly. Not a quick nod, not a reluctant one, but one that felt heavy, as though she had made peace with something she couldn't take back. Yes, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I'm in love with her. I had prepared myself for many things, but not for this. I had expected lies, excuses, explanations, something to make sense of the things I'd seen and felt, something that would make it all hurt a little less. But this was different. This was honesty, raw and unfiltered, and it hit me harder than anything else could have. And it wasn't the fact that she loved Ashley that stung, it was the reason behind it. Her next words, quiet and steady, cut deeper than I could have imagined. I wasn't looking for this, she said, her eyes never leaving mine. But with you, I'm no longer myself. That was it. That was the moment I realized that everything we had, every argument, every tear, every moment of quiet together, had been building up to this. It wasn't the infidelity that hurt the most, not the way she had pulled away or found solace in someone else. It wasn't even the betrayal of trust. What hurt was the realization that she had been living beside me, sharing a life with me, and yet had been lost for so long. It wasn't about another person. Ashley wasn't the issue. The issue was that Molly had stopped being herself with me, and that was something I couldn't fix. The words rang in my ears. I'm no longer myself. That was the deepest cut, the one that had always been lurking beneath the surface. She wasn't the woman I had fallen in love with anymore, and I wasn't the man she had once needed. We had both been pretending, drifting along, pretending that everything was fine. But deep down, we both knew it wasn't. It hadn't been for a long time. And so, there we were, two people standing at the edge of something we couldn't undo, facing the truth that had been lurking in the silence for so long. She didn't cry. She didn't apologize. She simply sat there, her face calm, her eyes resigned to the reality of what she had said. I didn't know what to feel. Anger? Pain? Relief? There was a part of me that felt an unexpected sense of clarity, like a fog had finally lifted. But there was also something else, something darker, something heavier. I wasn't sure if it was the death of our marriage or the death of the person I thought I was in love with. But it didn't matter now. The words had been spoken, and they were true. For a long time, we didn't say anything. The silence between us was no longer comfortable. It wasn't just the absence of words. It was the realization that everything we had known, everything we had built, was now shattered. There was no going back. I helped her pack her things that night. We both moved in slow motion, almost as if we were on autopilot, each of us doing what needed to be done without any real thought behind it. She thanked me when she left. It wasn't a thank you that felt like closure, but a thank you that felt like an acknowledgement of the inevitability of it all. We both knew it was over. There was no anger, no shouting, no final moments of passion. Just the quiet understanding that we had both reached the end. And so, she left. And I stayed behind, in the same house, in the same silence, but now with the knowledge that we had both lost something that could never be regained. The days that followed felt like a blur. I went through the motions of life, teaching, eating, sleeping, but nothing felt real anymore. The house seemed emptier than it had ever been, the silence louder than it ever was before. I didn't know how to move forward, didn't know what to do with the space Molly had left behind. It wasn't just the physical absence of her things, her clothes, her presence in the house, it was the emotional weight of it all. For so long, we had been two people stuck in a routine, living side by side, but now, without her, I was left with nothing but the echoes of a life that used to be. It wasn't sadness, not really, it was something worse. A kind of numbness that I couldn't shake off. I wasn't angry at her, not in the way I thought I would be. There was no hatred, no resentment. What I felt was emptiness, and that was far harder to bear. I found myself sitting at the kitchen table more often than usual, the same place where we used to share our mornings. I made coffee, but now it was just one cup instead of two. It seemed like such a small thing, such a trivial change, but in that one cup, I could feel everything that had been lost. The smell of the coffee was still the same, the warmth of the mug still comforting, but it didn't mean anything anymore. It was just something to do to fill the time. I wasn't trying to move on or forget. I wasn't even thinking about how to fix things. I was just existing, waiting for something to shift, something to pull me out of the fog I was in. But nothing happened. The silence stayed. The stillness became more oppressive, more unbearable, until it was all I could focus on. Sometimes, I'd sit and think about what she had said, the words that had cut through everything. With you, I'm no longer myself. It wasn't just a statement about our relationship. It felt like a statement about the entire person she had become. It hit me hard because, in some ways, I had felt it too. We were two people who had slowly lost our way. I had tried to ignore it for months, to pretend that things were fine, that we were fine, but the truth was we had both checked out long before that night. We had just been too afraid, too comfortable, to admit it. And yet, when I thought about it, when I really let myself feel it, I realized that I wasn't sure what I would do differently. It wasn't that I wanted to be angry or resentful. It wasn't that I wanted to fight for something that was already gone. It was just that the quiet between us had felt like a kind of surrender, a mutual resignation that neither of us could escape. And now, without her here, I didn't know what to do with myself. There were moments when I almost reached for my phone, when I almost dialed her number, when I wanted to tell her that I forgave her, that it was okay. But each time, I stopped myself. I wanted to fix things. I wanted to tell her everything would be okay. But something inside of me held me back. It wasn't that I couldn't forgive her. It was that I didn't know if forgiveness was the right thing. What was there to forgive when we had both let it slip away? When we had both failed to say the words that needed to be said long before? I couldn't reach out. I knew that much. Because some things, no matter how much you want them to, can't be fixed. Some things stay broken, and trying to put them back together only makes it worse. And maybe that's why I didn't call her. Maybe that's why I didn't send a message or ask her to come back. Because I knew, deep down, that some things are just too far gone, that trying to resurrect the past only traps you in it. And so, I kept the silence. I let it be what it was, something that neither of us had ever spoken aloud but that both of us understood. In that silence, there was no more pain. It wasn't that I had forgiven her. It wasn't that I had accepted what had happened. It was simply that the noise of everything, the anger, the confusion, the regret, had faded, and what was left was a kind of quiet understanding. I wasn't sure if I would ever see her again, or if I would ever get the closure I was supposed to have. But for now, that didn't matter. I had learned that some things are just meant to be left unsaid, and some silences are more honest than words could ever be. So, I made my coffee, and I let the days pass. One cup at a time. A few weeks passed, and I found myself in a strange rhythm. The house had become a place I barely recognized anymore. Empty, yet filled with memories I couldn't escape. The silence was still there, but it no longer felt like a weight I was constantly trying to carry. In some ways, it had become a strange kind of comfort, like an old friend who never spoke but understood everything you were going through. I would wake up in the morning, make my coffee, and go through the motions. Sometimes, I'd sit in the kitchen for a little longer, savoring the warmth of the cup in my hands, feeling the space around me stretch out in all directions. It was a silence that wasn't painful anymore. I wasn't searching for meaning or answers in it. I had stopped trying to figure out what went wrong, stopped asking myself if there was something I could have done to fix it. I knew, in the deepest parts of me, that there was nothing left to fix. We had reached the end of the road, and while the journey had been long, it was over. I wasn't sad about it, not in the way I had expected to be. It was more like I had accepted it for what it was, something that had run its course. There were moments when I would think about Molly, wonder where she was, what she was doing. I thought about the life she was building now, the life she had chosen, and I wondered if she felt the same way about it. Did she ever think about the silence we had shared? Did she feel the absence of the life we had? I never asked myself these questions when we were together. But now, without her, it was hard not to. I had expected that I would be filled with anger, with resentment, but I wasn't. I wasn't angry at her for leaving, for finding something else, for finding someone else. I didn't even know if I could truly call it betrayal anymore. It was something different. A realization that we had both drifted so far apart, so quietly, that neither of us had even noticed. It wasn't her fault. It wasn't my fault. It was just what had happened. We had both outgrown each other in our own way, and there was no going back. I found comfort in the things I used to avoid. I put on music that Molly used to mock as childish, songs she had never understood the appeal of. I listened to them now, letting them fill the space where her presence used to be. Sometimes, I'd play an old album she hated just to remind myself of what it felt like to be the person I used to be before all the tension, before all the silence. I laughed at the lyrics, the absurdity of some of the songs, and for the first time in months, I felt a spark of something like freedom. It wasn't the freedom I had imagined when we first broke up. It wasn't some grand moment of clarity. It was just the small, simple act of reclaiming something that had once brought me joy, something that had been swallowed up by the quiet of our life together. I hadn't realized how much I had lost of myself, of the things I used to enjoy, until I had the space to rediscover them. And in that rediscovery, I realized that I wasn't as broken as I thought I was. I was still here. I was still myself, even if I had to piece myself back together one song at a time. I almost picked up the phone to text Molly once or twice. I'd think about it when I was sitting there, with my coffee and the music playing in the background, the room filled with the hum of life moving forward. I wanted to tell her that I had forgiven her, that I wasn't angry anymore, that I understood. I wanted to say that it was okay, that everything was okay. But each time I picked up the phone, I put it down again. I thought about what I would say, how I would say it, but the words never came. It wasn't that I hadn't forgiven her, it was just that there was nothing left to say. I had nothing to prove, nothing to fix. I had learned something in all of this, something I didn't expect to learn at all. Some things, some silences, can't be filled with words. There was nothing left to be said between us, and sometimes, that was the most honest thing of all. I realized that, in the end, the silence between us wasn't about abandonment or rejection. It wasn't about anger or betrayal. It was just a reflection of everything that had come before, the moments we had let slip away without speaking, the things we hadn't said to each other for too long. We had lived in a silence for so long, I had forgotten how to break it. But now, in this new silence, I had learned to live with it. I had learned that there could be peace in the quiet, even when it felt like it was everything you had lost. And so, each morning, I made my coffee. Just one cup now. I let the music play. I let the silence be what it was. And in that silence, there was no more pain, no more need for forgiveness, no more unfinished words. There was just me, sitting in the quiet, knowing that sometimes that was enough. And maybe, in time, it would be more than enough.